Great, thank you. So at the University of Regina, we've had a small but kind of consistent digitization program. It's consistent with a few gaps for a number of years. We've been a Content DM customer for well over a decade now. But when I started there, I was tasked with starting to think about digital scholarship more broadly. And I'm not sure exactly how I came across WAX for digital exhibits, but I'm always pleased, and I'm very pleased to hear that other colleagues here are working on WAX and that there will be a workshop tomorrow on it. So it's nice to find out that there's other pockets of activity happening there. So there is the lightning talk on minimal computing. Last year I fell down a minimal computing rabbit hole in terms of a little bit of fascination around it. The idea that you could go back to the early days, I guess, where there weren't as many complexities to certain projects. The idea that you could do computing without all of these dependencies, requirements, and complicated servers and software. And that's partially because of the tension. I call it the tension. I think it's something everyone in this room can relate to in some scale. It's a desire to support new things, new initiatives, and things like that, and new IT initiatives and digital initiatives. When you're confronted with a finite amount of IT resources and budget, as we all are. The Stuart Vanier, who has it was a DLF talk that was later put on the GoDH site. The minimal computing movement comes out of digital humanities, but given the adjacency of libraries to that, they speak about it quite a bit. And this one actually really spoke to me about the idea that in the early days of the web, it was just static web publishing, and then we got complicated with CMSs and other things and introduced complexity. And the best example of that, a common example anyways, is WordPress, which is not overly complex, but still, when you're looking at things, you get all these things in the middle that require continual care and feeding in order for it to run. And I had a WordPress site hacked a few years ago, and that's a common thing. If you don't pay attention to it, if you aren't constantly doing the upgrades, looking at plugins and themes, you will get hacked with that. This is a simple example. A lot of the software projects that people are supporting in this room are much more complex than this for sure. But it's just a nice example. And of course, out of the WordPress thing, people all used WordPress for a while, and then a few years ago I started hearing about static site generators, which appealed to me because of the apparent simplicity of them. For those who are unaware, static site generators use a templating system to generate a static website, and you do all the work on your computer. So all the work is done on the computer, and then you transfer a static site to the server to serve up. So it's really much a return to the static pages of the web that were around in the late 90s. The benefit of these systems is that you avoid handwriting a lot of HTML, and they're fast, secure, and low maintenance. There's no dependencies to continually upgrade. I put a little, for those who are unaware, I've put a link there for static site generators. And that brings us to WAX, which at its core is built on top of the Jekyll static site generator. It's a project maintained by Mari Narup and Alex Gill from Columbia University Libraries. And I just want to give a shout out to Peter Binkley, who did the proof of concept for the IIIF piece of it in the early days that they then took and built upon as a concept. They describe it as an extensible workflow for producing scholarly exhibitions with minimal computing principles. And it's roughly equivalent to digital library software like Content DM and Omeka. And I think the thing that struck me when I first looked at the WAX demo up on their site was just how incredibly speedy it was. And we're on hosted Content DM, and at times it can be a little pokey, I would say. But WAX, again, is a set of general tools, and it's very customizable and extendable and flexible. You can swap things out. But at its core is a couple of Ruby gems designed to process a CSV or JSON file and produce web-friendly metadata in a markdown format. You can create a search index using that metadata, and it just feeds it into a JavaScript library known as lunar.js. And you can publish high-quality digital images using the IIIF image standard that's becoming widely adopted. I noticed that, so we worked on the initial project last year. Actually, it went live in October of last year, and so I hadn't paid much attention to it until I pitched this presentation, started looking at what had been updated since then. And they do have a simple image generator as well now. So again, there's so many options in there that are exciting. So project number one, this was an experiment. It was a one-time event. A lot of our digital collections we actually build in Content DM or publish in Content DM and then create a basic static site. This one was done entirely in Wax though. So it was the 50th anniversary of the building of the Archer Library, and for the University of Regina, it's a big thing because it was the architect of the original South Campus was Minoru Yamasaki, who also was the architect of the World Trade Center in New York, and he had this kind of grand vision for Regina and the new South Campus that has carried through time. It was meant to be a one-time event. It was a town hall for the campus, and our archive staff had pulled a bunch of archival material together for a physical display, and I just kind of threw it out there, well, why don't we just do a digital display as well, digital exhibit to go along with it. I think I proposed this maybe a month and a half before the event, and so it was to see how fast we could get things up as well. So the end result here, and I'll just navigate there. This is the result of the project. So there's Minoru Yamasaki. There's the library as it was in the early days. And down here we have the collections. And so it's a collection of 30 items, 30 images altogether. And you see, again, we used the leaflet.js.library. And you can zoom in, and you go full screen, and it's really fast. Another improvement that the maintainers have added since then is OpenSeaDragon, so you can actually specify in the YAML template to use OpenSeaDragon or another viewer instead of the leaflet.js one. So there he is presenting the original plans. One thing we didn't do with this one was we didn't take advantage of the search index. We could certainly do that. Oh, and I'll show the metadata down the page here. So, and that's just produced from Markdown files that are generated from the CSV. So overall, it came together really quickly. James Hollabet's our digital collections administrator, worked with me on it, and we got it up well in advance of the event, and that was including scanning the items, producing the metadata that the archival staff put together, and then putting it up there. In terms of implementation, it was now a year ago, and so James and I were talking about this, and we don't actually remember much about the implementation, which means that it was fairly straightforward. What I do remember is that because I had used Jekyll before, and because I was fairly familiar with Ruby, and static site generators, that really paved the way for that. It's at core a Jekyll site and Jekyll theme. So that was extremely helpful. The one thing I do recall, and this is an issue I think perhaps my misunderstanding of file paths or something, but we had trouble getting the root domain. So James and I ended up passing back the site back and forth several times. But overall, it was as advertised. The documentation is fantastic for those of you who are looking at it. It was flexible. You could swap out different things. I added the full screen thing into leaflet.js. Speedy, and since then we've kind of just left it, and we don't have to worry about it in any way. So if you're thinking about things like Omeka, which will still require upgrades and things like that, yes, there's certainly features there, but if you're just talking about a basic site, this is proving really attractive to me. This second project is actually just something I did off the side of my desk. It's not actually formally published yet, but it came out of the question I had from the first time around is will it scale? So it's meant to be for smaller digital collections. We only did 30 images as the first project. But in the meantime, we digitized 2,300 press releases dating back to 1962 of the university campus. Our archival staff love this because they get lots of questions about when certain events happened at the university. So I fed them through the scripts and just posted them to a site here, and it still performs very well. So this one I did generate a search index for, and it is the one part where performance is lacking, and that's largely because it's an 11 megabyte JavaScript or JSON file that the JavaScript library processes, so there is a bit of a lag on it, but still pretty speedy. And of course, as live demos go, here comes the problem. But so in this one, the OpenSeaDragon viewer option was added, and so as the default, so that one was there. All right, so there's our, that was working on my computer earlier, so I suspect it's some sort of odd permissions thing. That was the other thing, just standard web permissions apply to this for those who are delving into this. So overall, that was, so this gets into the question of when do you start looking for something that's a little bit more robust. And I think the nice thing about this particular project is it is a set of tools, and you can begin swapping things out here and there. So there was 2,300 files there. The initial size was 1.4 gigabytes, but because of the way the files are processed, because it's a static IIIF generator, it actually produces file sizes, many more files, and a much larger file size. So if you're looking at larger collections, it's not actually the scalability of the static site that's the problem. It's the storage that it will end up taking in terms of that. So at some point, you probably want to look at something like Cantaloupe, which is a IIIF viewer server that generates things more dynamically and caches the most used ones. And as I mentioned, the lunar.js JSON file, which included the full text OCR of everything in those press releases, did balloon to there, but it's still fairly usable at this point. But I think that would be the first point actually where you'd probably end up using an external search index like Elasticsearch or Solr. So the conclusion, and I'm taking this directly from the site, is that this is best suited for folks who are willing to take on some technical responsibility in exchange for a lot of flexibility. So it does kind of put all the work up front on the project in terms of it's not a classic CMS where you enter data into a web form and publish it. You do have to kind of prep everything in advance there. And the Jekyll ecosystem is, I would say, quite robust, and there's themes, plugins for lots of things now, so there's lots of creative ways to do things, I think, for features that would be associated with a traditional dynamic database-driven CMS. But overall, it's for a little experiment kind of off the side of the desk, I'm pretty impressed with what came out. So. Benefits as with static site generators, speed, security, longevity. When we're talking about digital preservation and making things persist over time, I think static sites have a huge benefit there. We have certainly had projects that were done in 2006, 2007 in those with dynamic databases behind them, and that we've then had to do a lot of work to basically rehabilitate and publish. There was a project at the U of R Press that the Saskatchewan Encyclopedia, which James spent a lot of time republishing, basically, once the press wanted to say goodbye to it. So things like this will persist much longer, I think, with a few tweaks here and there. The other thing that's promoted on the site, and the thing that caught me is I think it ties into the digital humanities course that was presented on yesterday, but they do describe it as a great teaching tool. And I think it's because what they say is it focuses on core kind of web development, text editing, Git, command line things that are kind of core to the infrastructure of computing. They're not specific necessarily to this one project. So I'm curious what people think about that, and for people who are working more closely with scholars, is this sort of something that would be attractive to digital humanists who are working in this area? It's not something I've personally tested yet on this, and it's something that I'd like to hear more about. So. Just a thanks again to James Hollebetz and the U of R archives team for putting this together in fairly short order, and open to any questions now.
Are there any questions for Dale? Oh, I see. Peter's getting to the mic.
If you could sell the Library of Congress on using wax to fix the slave narratives project, how much of Kate's criticism could, and how much would continue? Basically, could we have a project plan now, please?
Kate, should we talk about that? Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly, I forgot the other thing that that we didn't do with this project that I'd like to delve into more, and actually what we're looking at there would be the lunar.js, the search index. We didn't have any repeatable fields or anything really too complex there, and yeah, I'm curious because I think what Kate was describing this morning was more connections between things than currently exist. And yeah, it's a fascinating question. Lots of opportunity.
Okay, let's take a moment to say thank you to Dale.